podcasting from Memphis, Tennessee. He's a soldier, storyteller, historian, and maybe a bit of a hellraiser. Click, listen, and enjoy. It's Dave Carter on the Ricochet Audio Network.
All right, folks, we are locked and loaded today. We've got some really good information, some perspectives that I think you'll find compelling and fun to listen to as well. I am Dave Carter, and it's a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today. Now, as the mob ratchets up the level of crazy and the left does everything to tell us not to believe that which we can see with our own eyes, it's time for us to ratchet up the level of knowledge and knowledgeable commentary and analysis. I think a persuasive case can be made that at a time like this, when it seems that chaos reigns supreme, that some historical perspective is urgently needed, is most urgently needed, and for that we turn to a gentleman who, what I would argue, is one of the smartest men in America today. Victor Davis Hanson is a senior fellow at the Hoover Institution. He was a National Endowment for the Humanities fellow at the Center for Advanced Studies in Behavioral Sciences at Stanford University. He was a visiting professor of military history at the U.S. Naval Academy, and he was the William Simon Visiting Professor of Public Policy at Pepperdine University, among many other prestigious endeavors and assignments. He's been awarded the American Philological Association Excellence in Teaching Award, as well as the Eric Brindell Award for Excellence in Opinion Journalism, and was presented the National Humanities Medal in 2007 by President George W. Bush. He's authored literally hundreds of articles, book reviews, and editorials on Greek, agrarian, and military history, as well as contemporary culture, and has written or edited at least 24 books. I could go on, but it would take the remainder of the show to do that. So with that, it's a pleasure indeed and an honor to welcome Professor Hanson to the program today. How are you, sir?
Very good.
I hope that you and yours are staying safe from both COVID and chaos.
So far.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Mark Twain is reported to have said that history doesn't necessarily repeat itself, but it often rhymes. So it helps look at current events from an historical context. So a broad question, if I may. Surveying the current madness is enveloping so much of the nation, from indiscriminate violence to what I would argue is a widespread effort at cultural purging, where our very history is being demonized and erased. In your opinion, what event or chapter from history most closely resembles the current carnage and cultural destruction that we're seeing unfold all around us today?
Well, I don't know if we have one that matches it, but there's a lot of tessera and a mosaic that are similar. Mm-hmm. The sense of fear that people have of saying the wrong thing or being accused is sort of like the Salem Witch Trials. It went on for about 2 years, and it was based on nothing. And most of these people who have been canceled out by any fair token of what they've said or done are not guilty of anything other than occasionally being a little bit indiscreet. The revolutionary idea that this is a cultural revolution, that's 360 degrees, that it affects the clothing we wear, the TV shows we watch, the type of sports we're supposed to tune into, in addition to the politics, our statute, our education, the vocabulary, the words that are changing. That's more like the Jacobin phase in 1793 of the Reign of Terror, where the Jacobins, under Robespierre and his brother and a few others, purged everybody and then took over and tried to, rename the days of the week, year one, year zero type of things. It changed fashion, destroyed the church to the extent they could. A little bit of the cultural revolution of Mao is in this too, where people are accusing people of being insufficiently revolutionary. So you have all these liberal people that they're just kind of baffled. If you're the head of the Woodrow Wilson School at Princeton, how can you go after the Woodrow Wilson School? After all, we're liberal. So there's a little bit of that, a little bit of the Mensheviks. Those are kind of the Biden fellows that people like that. They think they can ride the back of the tiger, and they don't understand that they cannot. Joe Biden thinks he's riding an old donkey, and he's riding a tiger.
Right.
And he's going to be consumed the moment he gets off.
Well, and you mentioned the Mao Revolution, and at that point, you were required or expected to recite certain things. You're expected to be able to speak in the correct jargon and say the right things and voice the right ideas to hope to survive. And even that doesn't seem to be working now. As in your analogy to the Salem Witch Trials, just the mere accusation was enough to be your undoing.
I think people are afraid to say or do anything. I get emails every day from vulnerable people, and they'll say, what should I do? I'm an untenured professor, or I'm starting a journalist, I want to blog at a higher level, but I'm afraid. And they know that, so they're creating a deterrent sphere, and it's kind of like a mirror of glass that everybody, well, better metaphor is that old Apple commercial where the woman runs in the first Apple and she throws the hammer into the screen and it shatters, and Big Brother's face goes up. These people have no public support, so when you look at the issues that they're advancing, defund the police, tear down statues, rename buildings, when you start to poll, they don't have 51%. They didn't have it in the Democratic primary. The Medicare for everybody, New Green Deal, reparations, but nobody can say that. But it just takes a few people to throw that hammer in that glass, and when it shatters, and it will, then the whole facade falls.
It's a very
see how phony it is. Because it's based on a racist idea that we're going to judge people by the color of their skin, not their character, and your skin or your ancestry is essential rather than incidental.
I don't think honestly that Dr. King would recognize what is being done ostensibly even in his part of the movement that he started.
Yeah, and I don't think they would claim him as a forefather anymore.
That's a good point. A related question: I'm struck by how quickly the sheer pace that things are degenerating. You wrote a piece a few days ago called "The Thin Veneer of American Civilization." I'd like to quote for a moment from something that you wrote here. Quote, 9 months ago, New York was a thriving, though poorly governed metropolis. It was coasting on the more or less good governance of its prior two mayors and on its ancestral role as the global nexus of finance and capital. The city is now something out of a postmodern apocalyptic movie, reeling from the effects of a neutron bomb. Ditto in varying degrees, Minneapolis, Portland, Seattle, and San Francisco, the anti-broken windows metropolises of America. Walking in San Francisco today reminds me of visiting old Cairo in 1973, although the latter lacked the needles and feces of the former. Unquote. Again, looking at history, I note that France fell in a matter of weeks to Hitler's Nazis, and I'm wondering if the sheer pace of all this madness is what I find particularly unnerving. Is there a historical precedent for that, aside from France?
I mean, you mentioned the French army. The French army was, even though France didn't have a population the size of Germany, it was larger, 3 million people. It had better tanks and planes, but it was a facade, and Hitler knew that. Since the 1920s, they had been outlawing the use of the word Verdun in their school books because they thought that would be too provocative for the Germans in foreign relations. So I think that I guess what these things do, they're sort of like the final, there's all of these symptoms, and then you finally get to the sort of the symptom that puts it over the top. And so you take New York, it had it was coasting on Bloomberg and Giuliani, and de Blasio was undermining, but he couldn't undermine it quite enough to reach a point where people wouldn't want to be there.
Okay.
And then it's an unnatural environment where people live on elevators and mass transit. And to perpetuate that through a contagion, you'd have to have rampant cleaning of the subways and all. He didn't do that. And then when you add the defunding of the police and people didn't feel safe, and then I still think it could have made it, but had this happened in, say, 95 or 2001, but with the advent of Skype and Zoom, people said to themselves, it's dirty, you can get sick there, the police won't protect you,
right.
The mayor is crazy, and I want to get out while I still have some property values.
Yeah.
So we'll see, and I don't think they're going to come back as they used to, these cities. I know San Francisco, I don't think it's going to quite. I've talked to a lot of people that just don't go there anymore. And they don't work in the city. They're moving to places like Napa or Sacramento, or if they don't want to pay what could be it is a 13% top rate, it could be 16%. They want to move to, Nevada side of Lake Tahoe.
No. I read somewhere that in Chicago, some of the business owners and property owners are threatening to leave entirely, particularly given some of the spokespeople for these movements saying that they're going to continue to loot because it's the right thing to do in their mind. And a lot of the people that own the properties are saying, no, we're out of here. We're done.
That's the key point. They're going to continue to, because I think everybody feels if you get by a hurricane or we have a burglar and you invest and reconstruct and you're willing to take what little capital you have on the hunch it won't happen again. But once you get the impression that the people who were looting were not punished, there were no consequences, and the authorities, with a cheek-by-jowl nod, felt that maybe it was justified, and that maybe you're a bourgeoisie, petite capitalist, they're not going to protect you. At that point, and that can come very quickly, people say, you know what, why would I want to deal with these people? Psychology plays a lot, I think. It happened in California. One of the reasons 8 or 9 million people left the state was the psychology. They didn't mind paying the gas, higher sales tax and income tax, but they didn't like the insult to injury. So they started looking at their freeways were subpar, their schools were subpar, the crime was high, and then authorities said, you owe us this. You owe us this 12% sales tax. You owe us this 70% gas tax. That said, you know what? I can take the abuse, but the ingratitude.
Right.
And I think that really affects business when people kind of say, well, you deserved it, or I'm not going to protect you, or you've got too much money anyway.
Can be the final nail in many respects. This may be an unfair question, so feel free to tell me so. But to the extent that we can draw on historical comparisons to diagnose the problem and the seeds of the cultural implosion, does history offer any clues as to how it might be properly addressed in order to restore some measure of sanity?
What happens with a lot of these things, there was something like this in the third book of Thucydides' history at Corcyra, where there was this feeding frenzy, this madness. And Xenophon has a little bit in the Athenian ecclesia, where Theramenes, at the end of the war, they were accusing everybody and blaming everybody. What usually happens is there's some people who size it up, and they're not always good people. So Napoleon understood that these revolutionary characters didn't really have control of the army, and it was a revolutionary fluid condition, and that most Frenchmen wanted to be Catholic, and they wanted to be French, but they wanted power of the lower classes. So he was brilliant in how he manipulated that revolution. Said, I'm the real revolution, because I'm going to extend the revolution all over Europe, even though he was an autocrat and a militarist. But he ended it. And Hitler did the same thing. Stalin did the same thing with Leninism. Mao really ended the peasant idea. It was Pol Pot. And so we can go that way, where somebody's going to just hijack this thing. I don't think we're going to go that way in the United States. Or people are going to, as I said earlier, going to stand up. But I think because this is an election year, this thing is either going to take off or end. If Donald Trump survives and is reelected and he holds on to the Senate, then it's dead. And what we'll see is something like 1973, when after the McGovern wipeout, everybody said, you know, we never elect a Republican president. They said to themselves, I remember them saying as a kid, we can't get a Democrat after Kennedy elected, unless he has a Southern accent. So it was LBJ, and then they tried Humphrey, and it didn't work. And then they tried McGovern, it didn't work. And then it was Carter won, and then he won the presidency. And then they wheeled out Bill Clinton with a Southern accent, and then Al Gore won the popular vote. When they went back to care, Obama was the big difference. But I think there'll be recriminations, and people will say, you guys did this to us. If they win, then all of those people like Pelosi and Schumer are going to be swept away. And we'll see what happens. I don't think they'll last long, because the agenda is not sustainable in civilization.
Well, we're teetering anyway, which brings up another question on a different vein. On my last show, I had a gentleman on, and we talked about the 2016 election and the quote-unquote Flight 93 analogy, wherein the country was analogous to an aircraft on a collision course, which required immediate action to avoid this cataclysmic event. Some liked the analogy, some did not. But certainly in almost every presidential election, we hear that this is the most important election in our lifetimes. I've heard it without fail every single time. But given what we're seeing now, I guess my question is, A, is there such a thing, in your opinion, as a discernible point of no return that we can see happening right in front of us? And do you think we are at such a point at this time?
I think we're getting very close, because I think the 8 years of Barack Obama brought us hard to the left. Remember, this is the guy that ran on secure borders, opposition to gay marriage, financial sobriety and all that stuff. And there's no blue state, there's no red state, there's no black America. And then he was the most polarizing guy, and he moved the country, even though he failed to get an agenda through, he moved the country socially, culturally, psychologically to the left. And the candidate like Joe Biden is probably a Clintonite as far as his own private ideology. So he's got people that are controlling him that are farther to the left than anything we've ever seen. I don't mean that rhetorically. I mean, I just look at the document, the Sanders document, and they're going to embrace. When you start to read it, we've never seen anything like that until it's part of the failed, the part of the New Deal that didn't make it, the National Recovery Act and that kind of stuff. This is what it is, and it's socialism, and it's not viable. I mean, I don't think the people in Pennsylvania are going to want to outlaw fracking. I just don't think they're going to be up to it. And so it depends. There's a lot of things that are going to do. The virus, the course of the virus will matter. I think it's waning. I think the lockdown has been redefined as schools, which is a winning. Get the schools open, which most people want. The Black Lives Matter Antifa demonstrations have nothing to do, by their own admission, with George Floyd. They don't have posters on them anymore. It's kill the police or Louis Vuitton bags and Gucci stuff. Joe Biden doesn't seem to be fully cognizant. Everybody seems to poll that way. His presidential nominee seems to be to the left, and the wink and nod assumption is that they're going to tell us that he's hale, sober, he's perfectly all right, and they're going to run a virtual campaign where he doesn't come out, probably does a virtual Zoom like this debate, and then as soon as he's elected, if he were to be elected, we would hear that they were shocked that he's just failed in the last month or two. We've got to get Kamala in and that agenda. So I think everybody knows that's what's going to happen.
Last question, and for folks that were listening that may not be familiar with you, I know you were born in rural Fresno County in Central California. You're a fifth generation in the house there on the property. It's a family farm, if I remember correctly. You grew up in what I gather was the epitome of a diverse community. I mean, it's one thing to comment and opine on diversity; it's another thing to live it. So, if you don't mind, would you mind describing what the community that you grew up in was like back when you were growing up versus what it's like at this point?
Well, it was about 6,000 people. I'm sitting in the room where I grew up in. And my great-great-grandmother built the house in 1870. It was the first house in this area. And it was about 30% Mexican-American. I say Mexican-American because that was the second generation. Their parents largely either came through the Becerro program or they came illegally. So everybody wanted to learn English. It was a brutal assimilation integration. And that cadre was integrated. And then we had another 30% because this was an ethnic farming paradise. So we had thousands of people had come before World War I and after World War I. There were Japanese Americans. We had Portuguese Americans. We had a lot of Armenian. This was third largest Armenian community in Fresno County. And then we had white as defined, not as we do it today. My family were Swedish and they spoke Swedish. There were Danes. But there wasn't a monolithic idea that you're white. So a Portuguese guy could say to a Swede, I don't like those German Mennonites. And he would say, I agree with them. And then they would say, I don't like the Portuguese.
Yeah.
But it wasn't this white, non-white. And now it's about 25,000. We were ground zero of illegal immigration, 6 hours from the border. I'd say it's 90% Hispanic. Mm-hmm. All of those people that I just enumerated have gone. Oh. They've all left. Their children have sold out. The average farm size is no longer 100 acres. Well, it's very rich soil. We have very good water. So these conglomerates, very brilliant guys, form these 10, 20,000 acre almond places. And so they go to you, they rent your place or they buy it. They give the farmhouse, they rent it out to somebody here from Mexico. So nobody is living on their land and working it. So it's a much more fluid and unstable society. Okay. And then it's not diverse. Everybody thinks if you're not white, you're diverse, but what if you're all not white? And that's funny because a lot of the people I went to school with intermarried who are Mexican American, and they're very unhappy because they followed a particular ethic they were taught. And so if I look out here, I see the road where the people dump appliances, they dump tires, they dump diapers, as they do in Mexico.
Wow.
If I look over here, I see, I shouldn't say it on the air, but I see a group of people from Mexico that have maybe 7 Winnebagos, and there's maybe 40 people living there.
Yeah.
And everything there is illegal. I mean, everything they're doing is illegal.
Right.
But in California, the most hyper-regulated state in the union, the idea is that we've got to go after this shrinking white and Asian and acculturated class because they are law-abiding, and we're going to really, we have to go after them because 27% of the population of the state wasn't born in California, and many of them you just can't regulate, fine, arrest because a lot of their shadow existence is contrary to the law. So if you go down to a canteen, quote unquote, on wheels, it never moves. It has no bathroom, it has no running water, it cooks Mexican food, dirt floor right on the side of the street. It disrupts. A lot of people have been killed trying to pull in and out. But nobody would go in there and say, stop that, because the Fresno Bee or the papers would say, hardworking immigrant from Oaxaca pursued by,
Right.
Racist. Right. If I want to get solar panels on my shed, it's going to take me 2 years because the guy's going to come out and say, oh, wow, why don't you, I don't see I have a permit for that building that was built in 1888. Why don't you rewire it? And then those solar panels, I don't like them pointing that way. Why don't you redo the roof? And then, by the way, now that I'm out here, I see your barn over there has a 3-inch slab. It's 4-inch slab. I said it was built in 1910. It's exempt. Well, it was exempt, and that's how they do it.
But the Winnebagos are okay.
Yeah, because the idea is that, and I said this to a regulator. I said, by the way, why don't you just go to that house, that house, that house. There's Romex, there's no sewage, there's no running water with that canteen. And they said, are you crazy? Why would I go out at a bunch of felonies with people who are dangerous and they're not going to pay even if I cited when you're going to really pay off the nose from this? He was laughing about it.
Yeah.
So that's the cynicism in the state. And I think that's the reason that attitude that you get psychological satisfaction if you're a bureaucrat for going after the misdemeanor of the law-abiding citizen and you excuse the felony of the criminal because you don't know how to deal with it is emblematic of this whole protest. So people like you and I turn on the TV and we say, wow, this guy just spit in a cop's face. Wow, he just threw a brick through that store and he walked in and took something. Wow, he lit in the middle of the street, he lit a firework and shot it at somebody. Wow, he's got a laser, he's trying to blind somebody. If we were driving down the street and pointed a laser at a cop, we'd be in prison. So that asymmetrical application of the law, I think, is angering a lot of people. And to finish, the $64,000 question will be, to what degree does that express itself? The left and the center and the media and the Democrats and the foundation and Hollywood say it's not 2000, can never be 2016. These people just spout off, but the country's passed them by. Yeah. And we'll see. It'll all be known on election day.
Well, it seems to me that
there's a lot of people there who haven't voiced their opinion yet, and they will.
Right, and the options are very stark, I think, and very plain at this point. Professor Hanson, it's been an honor, sir. It's been an honor.
Thank you for having me.
And a real treat. Thank you so much. You folks take care. Take care of the family and everybody else. Folks, that's Victor Davis Hanson on the Dave Carter program. We've got 2 military retirees on the line, my friends Bob Lee and Pat Murphy.
What was happening, we were playing a team of Navy SEALs, and they were much better than us.
Well,
so they would come in waves. I don't know what happened to the rest of my team, but it seemed like it was Navy SEALs coming in waves, and they would pass the ball back and forth and try to kick it by me. Well, I have an advantage as the goalie. I can catch the ball with my hands.
Right.
So I figured out what I do is I'll intercept the passes, I'll run out, I'll catch the ball and take a knee. And I guess one of the SEALs took offense to that, and apparently one of them ran me over when I did it. His knee caught me in the side of the head, and I had to a dent about the size of a kneecap.
Golly.
So that's
If your speakers are making a funny sound, you're listening to the Dave Carter
So when
Show.
the phone would ring, she would answer the phone and say, PSAB Legal Office, may I help you? What I heard was, this is an average legal office, we can't help you. And another time she answered the phone, and I told the colonel about this because I said, do you know what this lady just said when she answered the phone? He said, no, what? I said, she said, we sell beagle dogs in the hell with you. I just knew that's what that woman had said. And then she would have these conversations, and I was hearing these strange things, and I'm trying to think, why would she want to take somebody to Topeka on a wheelbarrow? This makes no sense at all. And so I eventually said, I just closed the door so I could get my work done without agonizing over what the hell she was saying all the time.
Are you sure you didn't play soccer with Navy SEAL?
Dave Carter.
That was a blast from the past. That was a snippet from my conversation with my military buddies, Bob Lee and Pat Murphy. And how about Victor Davis Hanson, folks? I mean, there's a gentleman who can survey the current scene and correlate all that we're seeing now with various points in history, which give those with any intellectual curiosity at all a chance to add context to the day's headlines and perhaps see some patterns that may help in addressing the current situation. So if you like that, well, there's more to come. Because if you like intelligent and civil conversation generally, then the Ricochet Audio Network is the place for you. My friend Nick Plosser has a show that focuses solely on hearing from military vets, active duty, and reserve, and learning their stories. It's really quite a compelling show. Then there's Law Talk. Professors Richard Epstein, John Yoo, and former George W. speechwriter Troy Sinek. And here's a podcast I just heard a little of the other day. I think it's fairly new. It's called Mock and Daisy. It's hosted by Amy Jo Clark and Miriam Weaver, and it's a treat, folks. It's a fast-paced program where these two ladies, they describe themselves as chicks on the right, and they bring a truckload of common sense, quick wit, and a great humor to the latest news, the current fads. I mean, they've taken on everything from Cardi B to the woke culture and how it's dealing with the movie Blazing Saddles, and a great deal more. It's a real treat. I'll be listening to more of it as time goes, and you should too. Then, of course, we've got the flagship podcast where Rob Long and Peter Robinson and James Lilacs talk with some of the most engaging and interesting minds and personalities in the news today. So normally, if you want to comment on those podcast posts or comment on the main feed posts or read and comment on posts from the members-only side, that's going to run you $4.50 a month. Now, if you pay just 50 cents more a month, then you can write and publish your own articles on Ricochet and let the whole wide world see what you think about things. Well, here's a deal. Here's an idea. Let's say that you're not sure about all that and you don't want to spend $4 or $5 a month to find out. Well, here's what you can do. For the listeners of this show, just go to ricochet.com/gumbo. Since I'm a Louisiana kid here, that gumbo makes sense. So ricochet.com/gumbo gets you a free 30-day trial of Ricochet. And, hey, you take a look, kick the tires, do wheelies, whatever you want to do. And then after 30 days, if you are happy with what you're seeing and you want to continue your membership, then $4.50 a month gets you in the door after that. Sound pretty good? Yeah, of course it sounds good. So just head on over to ricochet.com/gumbo. That's GUMBO. And you too can join the conversation. Have mercy.
Celebrities, authors, pundits, and normal people too. All here, all on the Dave Carter Show.
And now it's time for the truly fun part of the show. And this time we turn to a guest from several weeks ago to revisit the situation on the ground in Minneapolis. Jenna Stalker, as you may recall, whether you recall or not, she finished at the University of Minnesota before going on to do a year in law school. after which she said, just stop the madness. And actually, I have a question about that we may get to depending on time. But to continue our story, Jenna became a researcher at the Center for Security Policy in Washington, D.C., before becoming a Marine Corps officer at Quantico, a training accident brought all that to a halt, and now she resides with her husband, who is a Coast Guard veteran, and their 4 doggies. 4 dogs, I'm sorry, but just about which 4 dogs is like having 4 kids. And that's why people drink. Anyway, so assuming that you're sober, Jenna, good morning. How are you?
I'm very well. How are you?
You're sober. Okay, good.
Yes.
All right, great. And folks, just to give you a quick reminder to take advantage of that, what I told you about a few minutes ago, if you take advantage of that 30-day free trial of Ricochet by going to ricochet.com/gumbo, because it's easier to spell than etouffee, you can become a regular member of the place, and there's a real chance you could end up on the show here as well. God help you. And we can trade jokes or talk about whatever it is that you'd like to. Okay, Jenna, so thank you for taking the time to talk with us again today.
Oh, thank you very much for having me.
One of the reasons that I wanted to get you back on the show here is a piece that you wrote for just a few days ago called Minneapolis Isn't Lost Yet. And in it, you give us a view from the ground, and with your kind permission, I'm going to read a couple of paragraphs from that.
Absolutely.
You write, quote, "The initial riots and violence in the aftermath of George Floyd's death engulfed the city like a blowtorch. But there's still a city here with people struggling to survive, to pick up the pieces of their neighborhoods, to find hope in the ashes of their reality. There's a fight to save a city, once at the threshold of vibrancy and decency and opportunity, now at the edge of the morass. Once the fires in the streets receded to smoldering embers, the national news outlets chased the rioters to the next blazing city, but when they left, other groups were quick to take advantage of our wounded city. Citizens were angry at leaders who utterly failed at everything except casting blame at each other, of course, and Trump. Angry at suffering economic ruin after months of state-mandated shutdowns, immediately followed by unopposed violent rioters, and looters. Angry at civic institutions that failed to protect lives and property. All the anger provided the perfect opportunity for groups marching under the flag of justice to step in and promise solutions and radical change," unquote. So my question is, I guess, are the local officials there as powerless and as emasculated now as they were a couple of months ago when the place was on fire? I mean, is everything just in a state of suspended animation there, or what?
Well, I think it's more they're just doing kind of CYA.
I'm familiar with that.
Yeah. To distract, from having to offer any real solutions there. So, whether it's the mayor pointing fingers at walls, there's been a huge blow up, a finger pointing there. Phrase saying, well, I contacted the governor and he wouldn't send it to the National Guard, and the governor saying, well, you never asked me. And that just sort of spiraled out of control.
And neither one of them wanted Trump to send anybody in.
No, because they don't want to be seen as losing control of a city that was clearly out of control.
Right.
And so now the city council is doing this terrible game of back and forth between defunding police and ignoring the true needs of the people that live there and are hurting in favor of, these groups like Black Lives Matter that are coming in and bullying people that should know better what's happening. And after decades of one party failure in the city,
right.
It's really taken its toll.
During one of the interesting things about your post was the comments that unfolded after the people read what you had to say. And while James Lilacs weighed in on part of this, I'm just going to read one sentence that he wrote. He said, "It's surreal, as if the very idea of arresting criminals has become politically toxic for the city's government." The whole idea of you do bad things, you're going to get arrested. We can't have that. We've got to back away from that outmoded thought, right?
Yeah, and what's amazing to me is that members of Joe Biden's campaign have contributed to this fund that have bailed out the people that destroyed the city. It's just mind-blowing to me.
Well, that can't be. He just told us last night everything is going to be safe and there'll be sunshine and butterflies and unicorns all over the place if we just vote for him.
That's right.
And that's right. They're voting to bail out the people that are setting things on fire. No, that just can't be. Huh.
Yeah, and it's terrible. You know, I went back, feels like a lifetime ago. You know, when I was in college, I worked at a Mexican restaurant on Chicago Avenue. I mean, it's a very diverse place. There's a lot of immigrant businesses there. You know, and it's just, what's disheartening is that we were really on a path where it was more of a grassroots, people taking charge of their own lives to try to make the city better.
Right.
A lot of small businesses coming in and doing that. And then it was all, you know, a matter of 1 week and it was all destroyed, burned down to the ground, literally.
Well, that gets to the mood of the people. And maybe I certainly have a better sense of it than what I do down here in Memphis, where well, never mind. This is like the OK Corral here. I'm hoping, perhaps against all the odds, but I'm hoping that enough people in Minneapolis, at least, know which political party has dominated the city for how long and how that's worked out and how clueless these leaders have been and still are, apparently, in the face of these mobs. What is your sense of the mood that's taking shape among the regular folks there who pay the taxes and do the hard work of trying to keep the place running?
Frustration. Mostly at just the lack of awareness in the city leaders, that they just are ignoring the people that are really affected by the lawlessness and the street violence. You know, they don't want to talk about the liberal policies that have been in place for decades.
Right.
You know, one party rule. So what they do is they just double down on, you know, they blame it on systemic racism or an inherent evil that the founders wrote into the Constitution, basically saying, no, it's not your fault. You know, so they're doing their best to combat whatever, you know, there's other groups out there, A Mother's Love, the Woodson Center is trying to, you know, go through some religious groups.
Right.
So trying to consolidate some power in community groups, trying to go around the city council, but it's very hard. You know, when they double down on consolidating their own power, they devalue families, religious institutions, the dignity of work.
Yeah.
You know, so it's kind of a vicious cycle. And really what I found heartening was Kim Klacik in Baltimore.
I did see that.
How she, that she really, really, you know, that model I think is going to be the way of the future if we want to see a Minneapolis that rises from the ashes.
Right.
You know, you talk about people that have never had a conversation with a conservative or a Republican in the city. And that's no way, you know, there's one thing to talk about solutions and it's another thing to actually communicate them to the people that live there. And I think if conservatives want to at least plant some seeds, you know, instead of just writing off these cities, then I think that's
a good model to follow.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And you alluded to this a minute ago, but you've got ties, very personal family ties to Minneapolis. I mean, if I remember right, if I read you right, half your family is buried just a couple of miles from where the riots took place.
Yep.
And you said you worked your way through college at a Mexican restaurant there. Your parents and brothers are still there, I gather?
Yep. My brothers, and they actually moved out of Minneapolis recently. And now they're, you know, even one step further, they want to take their kids out of public school because the schools are, you know, and that's one of the reasons they moved out of Minneapolis. And I had a conversation with my brother about this. You know, it's like, there's only so far away you can move. And at some point you have to, my feeling is you can't just abandon your city. Like, I really think that it's worth fighting for future generations. It's a beautiful city, and
Sure.
It's a sad state to be in.
So for you, it's not an abstraction. It's not just a headline on the news. It's home, and it shouldn't be an abstraction for the people that are listening to you either. With respect to people like your brother and other folks, I gather that they're finding themselves in a sort of fight or flight dilemma. Then, do I stick this out, or do I take my family and get them out of here before somebody gets hurt? And that's a lot. I gather a lot of people are grappling with that choice.
Yeah, and what's sad is the people that can move out will, and then the people that really can't. they don't have the means, or maybe they're stuck at a job there, or their family situation, and then they're stuck and they're going to be subject to the street violence that's just out of control. You've got little kids shot in the street, and we had a case where a lady was shot in the park. She was pregnant. She died. They managed to deliver her baby, but then a month later they couldn't keep the baby alive. It was just a tragedy on all counts.
Believe me, here in Memphis, we have had just since last weekend. I'm talking to you on Friday, but since last Saturday, or not last Friday, I think we've had over a dozen shootings. It doesn't stop, and there've been probably well over 50 highway shootings since January here. And when my situation allows it, I'm done. But I don't have any. Aside from my wife's family, I don't have any roots here. But this is I carry everywhere I go, because you just never know anymore. There was a lady that was shot out in front of a Walgreens in a nice part of town yesterday. She's dead, just out of nowhere. These things are happening. So when I get the chance, I know where there are safer places. I'm going to go to them. But I don't have the ties and the roots that you do to Minneapolis. What about the business and property owners? I know that in Chicago, the business owners and property owners they're telling the local government, either you get it together and control this mayhem, or we're pulling up stakes as well. Was that happening there in Minneapolis?
Yeah, we had a business. I can't remember the name of it now. They definitely are leaving the city, and they employed, I think, something like 100 people. You drive down Chicago Avenue, Portland, Lake Street. The boards are still up. I don't even know why you'd bother to take them down on the windows. The graffiti is still there. There's holes where there should be buildings in the blocks. My husband and I drove past Children's Hospital on Chicago Avenue, where my niece was going for her heart condition. And there's someone getting arrested right outside the Children's Hospital, and I think if you can't feel safe running your business here, or you don't know if there's going to be another riot. Right. The 5th Precinct was attacked again last weekend. It's terrible, and the government doesn't do anything to help. In St. Paul, part of the Twin Cities, there's a barber shop. It's King Milan's, and they were kind of infamous for the owner, Denny Milan. Is a black business owner. Yeah. He runs his barber shop. During the COVID, Walds shut everything down, and they were ready. They had a safety policy, masks, how many people could be allowed in the store, appointments only. Mm-hmm. So he's like, I have one choice. Either I open or I'm going to be closed forever. So he decided to open and defy the rules. And St. Paul, the police came in and shut him down after an hour. This is a gentleman who gives free haircuts to little kids, in that neighborhood, who are mostly black kids, every fall so they can get ready for school. And here's the governor. If you want to talk about racism, where's the Black Lives Matter fighting for this guy? He's a perfect example of a small business owner. He's making it. He's helping his community. He's a leader that everyone should be looking at as a great example of what could be, in the cities. Business owners have it really tough.
There'll be no protest to help him. And if that organization were practice truth in advertising, they would call themselves some Black Lives Matter, because that's actually what they believe in practice.
Mm-hmm, absolutely.
I don't know. It's the whole thing is sad all the way around, and I wish. But one of the problems is if the criminal charges against the police officers don't go the way they had originally hoped they would go, because the evidence in the body cam footage is showing some complicating factors. I'm afraid the place is going to blow up again.
Yeah, and that's why I think that people are smart to either get out of town or leave those boards up, because eventually there's not going to be anything left to burn. But Keith Ellison, has tried to keep that body cam footage, under wraps.
Yeah.
And it was leaked out, but so now we can kind of see, this person who champions transparency is
anymore. I mean, it's interesting. This is totally unrelated, but it's interesting to me that anymore, if you want to see what really happens or learn what really took place in the story in the States, you have to go to the British press because they'll run it, because ours won't, because it's just too damning to their narrative. But in Great Britain, they don't have that. They'll go ahead and run it. Mm-hmm. Well, I want to ask. I'm change gears completely, but I saw, and of course, I'm not dismissing what's going on there, and I know you're fighting the good fight, and I'm going to do everything I can to help you from over here, and I'm sure a lot of folks will. There was something in your background that I alluded to earlier, where you did a year in law school, and then evidently sobered up.
Have I forgotten year?
Yeah, I'm wondering. I'm wondering. I mean, because when I was in college, I took just a smattering of law classes. And I immediately became disillusioned with the whole thing. I rightly or wrongly, I got the general impression that to the extent that justice takes place, it's incidental to the process. It really wasn't intended. It just kind of happens that way every now and then. Did something like that happen for you? Were you disillusioned, or you just said, no, this really just isn't for me, period?
Well, it was a little bit of both. But it was mostly, I was disillusioned. The way that, there's a certain law speak and, procedures that don't always communicate well in the common sense terms.
Right.
And it's sort of like you're just running circles around, and I don't want to say deceptively, but sort of deceptively to try to get to where you want to go.
It's a certain amount of subterfuge, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny that when I go through and I read, like whether it's National Review or Town Hall or Washington Examiner or even in Ricochet, you can sort of tell who is a lawyer by how they write and the arguments they make and who is not. So it sort of sticks out a little bit, and I get a little frustrated because it's hard to argue with those people because they're very good at arguing, but not necessarily getting at the answer that makes sense to most regular folks.
Yeah, if you depend more on rhetoric than you do reason, then I totally get it. And I'm not trashing. I mean, it's like what Winston Churchill said about democracy, right? It's the worst system possible, except for all the others. And I look at that. Look at our law, our judicial system the same way. The process has to be consistent. I get that. I'm just not personally wired to be able to work within that process without becoming an alcoholic. So
there are good law. I'm not going to paint with broad strokes and say they're all bad, but I mean it's there's a lot of good people.
I know. I think probably 95% of the lawyers out there are just making the other 5% look bad.
Yeah.
Okay, one last thing. I know you're a very prolific writer on Ricochet, and I haven't read all your posts, and that's my loss. But one of the things that I've seen is that people are really eager to engage with you in the comments, and you're eager to engage with them as well. So I'm just wondering, and sometimes not everyone agrees with you, but the exchange is generally civil, right? So which do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy writing the post in the first place, or do you enjoy engaging with the readers afterwards more?
I think in Ricochet it's engaging, and I think that's what really makes it a special place is the conversations that start.
Yeah.
And I know, and I read some of the comments, and I think, well, that's not at all what I meant, I didn't look at it that way.
Right.
I don't particularly sometimes I write because I generally what I do is my only day off is Wednesday. So I stay up all night long on Tuesday, so I publish Wednesday morning. So I don't particularly care very much for the 3 a.m. thing, but I really do enjoy the conversation. So I like the feedback. So, and there's so many smart people and funny people and perceptive people on the site.
If you read just a few posts from on the member side, but in particular, and you don't learn anything, then go get some rest because you're not conscious because there's so much there. And like we've said before, our folks have such a wide range of skill sets and expertise. It's just amazing to read what they have to say and learn their experiences and their own education and training. Yeah,
and from all over the country, and from it's not just a set of writers that have done nothing but write or worked in public policy their whole lives. It's, people that work in warehouses, truckers, right? And teachers, and I mean, stay-at-home moms and dads and lawyers and the whole spectrum. So it's really fantastic.
And reputable people. Right, yeah.
Yeah, only the most reputable lawyers.
Well, look, this has been fun. It always is. Very informative and interesting as always. So thank you for taking time to talk with us a little bit this morning.
And, it's always a pleasure. I thank you very much for inviting me back. It's great.
Well, you're fantastic, and don't be a stranger. I mean, if you're like me, you can't get any stranger, but still, hopefully we'll be talking to you again.
Yeah, and we'll see you in the comments section.
Yeah, there you go. There you go. All right, folks, that's Jenna Stalker on the Dave Carter program. Thank you so much, Jenna.
For the person who has everything, it's antibiotics. No, wait. It's Dave Carter on Ricochet.
Wasn't Jenna great? I mentioned this during the interview, but we see the destruction that's taking place in these cities, and unless you live in a hellhole yourself, you might not really understand the depth of the tragedy and the catastrophe that's unfolding. And if you're waiting on MSNBC or Joe Biden or CBS to tell you about it, you're probably suffering from a great dearth of information in the first place. So I wanted to bring Jenna on again and explain how this madness is affecting and hurting the lives of regular people, regular businesses, regular families that are trying to provide a service to their community and just get on with life and take care of themselves and their families. We talk a great deal about public policy from altitudes of around 30,000 feet, where the clouds and the platitudes float effortlessly by. But on the ground, the reality is different. Victor Davis Hanson can make wonderful analogies to ancient Greece, to Thucydides, to Homer, to ancient Rome, but he also has the advantage of living where the decay and the destructive results of lax immigration policy are unfolding all around him, as you heard him describe. It's one thing to opine from the podium about the need for racial harmony or justice or free college education or free false teeth or whatever it is that the left is promising you right now, in exchange for taking just a little more of your money, more of your freedom to live in peace and live in safety. But on the ground, where the cameras aren't always around and the politicians decline to visit, real people are suffering, and their plight deserves to be heard and understood, just as the family of the lady who was shot and killed in front of Walgreens just last night here in Memphis deserve to be understood, deserve to be heard. If you've enjoyed the program today, then or benefited from listening to it in some way, I invite you to go on over to DaveCarterOnline.com, where you'll find a lot more of that kind of thing, from articles I've written over the years to current articles of interest that have captured my attention, and I'm sharing with you over there. There's also a page full of podcasts for your listening pleasure, and a page called The Inkwell, where I write more introspective pieces for the readers of my website. That's over at DaveCarterOnline.com. The podcast here continues to grow. It's immensely gratifying, and it is currently heard all over the world, and we're certainly grateful that you listened with us today. With thanks and gratitude to Dr. Victor Davis Hanson for talking with us, and to Ricochet member Jenna Stalker for sharing her valuable insights, and with special thanks to you, the listener, I'm Dave Carter, and I'll see you next time.
Thank you for listening to The Dave Carter Show. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you won't miss a single episode. And while you're there, please leave a review and tell us what you think. And on behalf of all of us at The Dave Carter Show and the Ricochet Audio Network, thank you for listening.